we've got a lot of questions about strokes gained putting and what it is and how it works. So what if Keith Mitchell was a better putter? What would his year look like? Let's tee it up.
Welcome to Data Access Golf, your home for rapid golf improvement. And now, from the thin air of the Rocky Mountains, next on the number one tee, your host, Aaron Stewart.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Data Access Golf, the podcast. Thank you for joining us today. So I got a few questions, about strokes gained putting and what it is and how to do it. And there's actually a pretty good description about it on PGA Tour.com, just in the stats section. But essentially, and I'm going to try to explain it, and then I'm going to apply it. And we're just going to apply it to Keith Mitchell's year and hopefully kind of get an idea of what it's about. Strokes gained putting is simply a way for us to compare how well somebody is putting against the field for that day. Okay, so we have every single day, we will get a strokes gained putting number for any given individual, and that will tell us how they performed that day against everybody else in the field. And that's it, so only on that course. And there's a lot that goes into that number, and we won't get into that, but that essentially is as simply as I can break it down. It is just a number for us to try to calculate how well somebody is doing day to day in any given thing. But today strokes gained putting was kind of the first one that came out. And if you grasp what strokes gained putting is, then everything else starts to make a little bit more sense. So that's it. I mean, strokes gained putting is that. So in the case of Keith Mitchell, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. His strokes gain average for those 4 days was .22, which means that every day he picked up 20% of one stroke on the field on his putting. So it wasn't like if you're a 0, that means that you just don't pick up on the field at all. But he was 0.2 strokes better, which is, to put this into sort of perspective, the very best on the PGA Tour right now averages 1.149 strokes per round over the field. And that's Brian Gay. He's a fantastic putter, right? So he averages over the course of a tournament, then he will average almost 4.5. He averages 4.5 strokes above the field. He is better by 4.5 strokes. So if I shoot 12 under par and he shoots 12 under par, 4.5 of those strokes are probably going to come on the putting green against me if I'm a 0, right? So that's kind of how those sorts of things work out. Brian Gay covers up a lot of his weaknesses by how amazing he is on the putting green. Okay, so what does that mean? So it's kind of tough to kind of put it into place, but so what I thought would be kind of interesting. I hope it's interesting to you. It was a lot of work, so hopefully it's interesting to you. But so what I did is I went back through the tournaments that Keith Mitchell has played in this year, for which we have a stroke gained putting number. And I said, okay, so what if we just, again, he's not a very good putter. I mean, his strokes gain averages, I kind of went over these. In the Sony was minus 0.7, so he lost 0.7 strokes per round to the field. In the Farmers Insurance Open, he lost 2.6 strokes per round. And then you've got minus 1.4 at the Waste Management, minus 1.8 at the AT&T, minus 1.16 at the Genesis Open. So he's always losing strokes to the field on the putting green. For this particular tournament, he gained 0.2, but still he gained, which is a huge improvement over what he's done in the past. And so much so, I thought, okay, so let's just go back and look at this. Let's just say, for example, over those tournaments that I just talked about, let's just say that Keith Mitchell just averaged the .22, right, for the entire tournament. What would that have meant for him? And I'm just going to do it in money. So over the course of those tournaments, he has won, including the Honda, he has won $1.337 million. Okay, 1.337. So if he had putted better then if he had putted just as well as he had for the Honda Classic, he would have made He would have made $1.645 million, right? So an additional $300 and something thousand over the course of just those 5 tournaments. Okay, so he could have made, if he just putted the way he did over the course of last weekend, the previous 5 tournaments that he was in, he would have made an additional $350,000. Okay, so that's pretty amazing. I mean, if he was just, and that's not, I mean, it just goes from being so bad to being just barely, where you're just barely getting 0.2 strokes around. He can make an additional $350,000 over the course of 5 tournaments. Right? I'm just doing the tournaments that we have strokes gained putting numbers for him. So I just took it a step further, just for fun, right? We're all about funsies here at Data Access Golf. So I just said, hey, I mentioned earlier that Brian Gay averages he picks up 1.149, so 1.15 strokes on the field every single round, right? So over 4.5. He picks up over 4.5 strokes per round on everybody. That's his average. Okay, so let's say if Keith Mitchell putted like Brian Gay, what would that have meant to his pocketbook? It's super interesting. Okay, so if he would have done that, he would have made, over the course of those 5 tournaments, and I mentioned here, he would have made $421,759, right? Which was, when you add up, he made a little money over the course. What is it? He made 100 and plus something thousand, plus his big 1.2 million, right? So he would have made $421,000 if he had just putted like himself over those 5 tournaments before his big win, right? They got him to the 1.645. All right. Had he putted like Brian Gay, those 5 tournaments, he would have made $1.376 million. He would have made more in those 5 tournaments than he did with his victory at the Honda if he putted like Brian Gay. Right? So instead of sitting there, and he's thrilled. He's sitting there over the course of these 5 tournaments with his win, he's got $1.337 million. But if he putted like himself at the Honda for those 5 tournaments, he would have made $1.645 million. So he'd pick up an extra 300 plus. But if he putted like Brian Gay, he would have made $2.599 million, essentially $22.6 million over the course of those same 6 tournaments. And that's just how important strokes gained putting is. And that's why we use that. We can see how it is. We can now compare week to week. The PGA Tour doesn't give us those stats, but we can essentially take somebody's average and apply it and say, okay, if Keith Mitchell was a little bit better in putting, what would this do for him? And we can see in dollars what it would do for him. Instead of sitting at 1.3 million, he would be sitting at 2.6 million. He would have doubled his money if he putted like Brian Gay over the course of 6 tournaments. So that's kind of a cool thing. Hopefully that's interesting to you. Obviously, putting's very important. He putted for him super well. But if he putted like Brian Gay, he would be pretty much unstoppable with the way he hits the ball. So hopefully that's cool to you. Putting's very important. Making sure that we keep track of our putting stats. Make sure that we're working on the right parts of putting where we're weakest. Make sure that we're working on all parts of our game where we're weakest. We just happen to say that there is no question, based on the data, that Mr. Keith Mitchell needs a little putting help. And I think he'll get it. Obviously, he improved somewhat. For whatever reason, he could have doubled his money if he putted like Brian Gay. Thanks for listening. And remember, better data always means better golf. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Data Access Golf with Aaron Stewart. Check us out online at dataaccessgolf.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.